It's been too long, but we are finally back working on the 79 Corolla. Super excited to get back on this thing. It's been about a month since we've been able to turn wrenches on it or get any progress done, and we're changing that today. Hopefully we can get a ton done and get this thing a lot closer to hitting the streets and hitting the track. I went ahead and this morning I put together a list of things that are pretty important and need done. Battery, wiring, intake, exhaust, fuel. That's really what this list is. And this is stuff that needs ordered. So this is going to be a turbo build, so I'm going to need my manifold flanges, pipe to make a manifold, wastegate, an intercooler, and a turbo. Obviously the turbo stuff, not going to be necessary. We're going to get this thing running naturally aspirated first, and we're going to build up into an awesome turbo car. But first, I want to see what this thing can do as it sits. I want to get the engine wrapped up, naturally aspirated, get an exhaust on it, get some things together, make this thing look and feel more like a real car. And I want to take it to the dyno and the track and see what this thing does. I want to see what kind of numbers it puts down in a quarter mile. I want to see what numbers it puts down on the dyno. And I want to see how we can improve this thing along the path. So I've got a ton of really awesome parts that are going to be going into this thing. And today we're going to start with getting a fuel system figured out. So this fuel tank is stock and it should be adequate for what we're doing. It's a decent size, and I think if I get some bigger lines hooked up to it, it'll be able to do what we need it to do. But these lines, they just are not adequate for what we're doing. These lines were designed for an engine that puts out less than 100 horsepower, and our goal is to put out about 5 times that, 450 to 500, and that means we're going to need about 5 times the fuel. So I'm going to pull this tank out, we're going to assess, see if we can get some AN lines run to it, and get it ready to move an enormous amount of fuel up to the engine, and we'll just work from the back forward on the fuel system. We got the fuel tank out, it's on the ground, and we've been working on what we're going to do for the fuel system. This is the fuel cell that is out of the Supra, and I don't think it's going to work well. I wanted to give it a thought, give it an idea, but what I ended up deciding is I have a -10 fitting, and I'm going to drill out the drain plug that was in this thing, and I'm going to put a -10 fitting in so we can have the AN line run out the hole in the floor that's already there, that was there for draining the tank, and go straight to the fuel pump. That should be a nice solid feed that's going to give us plenty of fuel. It's in the bottom of the tank, and we even have a baffle in this tank, so there shouldn't be too big of an issue with fuel slosh, especially if we don't have an empty tank. That'll get us feed. I'll have to figure out return here in just a few, but it'll be all right. So we got the fuel tank mocked up, we got the bung mocked up. I've got everything ready. We're going to start welding it. It's actually full of water, and we're going to weld it pretty darn slow so we don't overheat any of the fumes that might be in there. I don't want to have any fires. We got the bung welded on. Not all pretty welds, but they all look like they're going to seal. They're going to be great. Since I have a bunch of parts on order for the fuel system, I got the feed, but I'm going to need some return stuff. My line is not quite long enough to make it from the engine bay to the tank and a few other things, so I ordered some parts, and we're going to jump on wiring the Corolla. First thing first, I am super excited. Our friends over at AUXBEAM hooked us up. They saw the build, they wanted to be a part of it, and they sent over a switch panel, some underglow, and all of the lights we're gonna need to get this thing absolutely lit up for the road. So we're gonna jump straight into getting this wired up, getting the switch panel in, which is gonna take care of the entire chassis wiring, and get this thing road worthy. If you're looking for lights, lighting accessories, or switch panels, go to auxbeam.com and use my code RDR15 for 15% off your order at checkout. Supporting the companies that support me, helps them, and it helps you save money. Again, that's code RDR15 for 15% off at checkout. What we've got here is an 8-gang switch panel that's going to be controlling the entire chassis wiring harness. So let's get started on installing it. One of the first things we're going to have to do to install the switch panel is I'm going to throw this seat in. I do not plan on keeping factory seats forever, but I need to know where I'm going to be sitting before I can start putting switch panels in, because I need to be able to reach it easily. So we're going to get this stuffed in there, and then we're going to start getting this wiring situation figured out. All right, we got the AUXBEAM switch panel in. I went ahead and I pulled out the ashtray bracket and just put this in right in there. It's super secure, super nice, and I can reach it really well from all the way back in my seat, leaned all the way back. I can still reach all the buttons. We've been working on getting this fuse box, solid state relay box installed. We've got the switch panel over here, and I decided to hide this fuse panel, fuse box, in the glove compartment area. I took out the little insert that the glove compartment stuff sat in, and I bolted this to the chassis. It's nice and solid, and I put it at a little bit of an angle so you can see everything, access everything nice and easy. But once this is all on, it'll hide everything nice and well. I then went ahead and I had some 4-gauge pure copper wire that I'm going to be running for power and ground. The AUXBEAM kit came with this fuse. It's actually a breaker that can reset so that if there are any issues, I don't need to replace a 60 amp fuse. So I'm going to be running my power to here. I've got power run from that to the fuse panel, and everything should be nice and good. This 4-gauge wire is going to be more than enough to handle the 60 amps, and then the power wire that came with the AUXBEAM kit going from the fuse. In the engine bay here, we've got these 2 wires, the ground and the power run. I'm just going to be routing them around through the grommet in the firewall. It should make everything nice and simple. I'm going to end up looming it just so it looks better. But for now, we've just got things run until I can get everything completely routed where it needs to be. And that's going to require quite a bit of manipulation down here. And then I'm actually going to be taking some of these other wires and changing some things up, because now we're going to have a nice solid power source in the cab, and we're not going to have to run a pretty fat wire to the ignition. I've been plugging away at wiring on the Corolla, and we're finally getting somewhere. We've got some wiring harness run through the engine bay. It's got everything we're gonna need for headlights, running lights, turn signals, and a horn, because we need all those things. And in the cab, although it doesn't look like a lot has gotten done, because over there it's still a wiring mess, under the driver compartment's gotten cleaned up a bunch, and I'm not sure if you can see that from inside, but we got some brake lights. So we're getting there. We're getting some things taken care of, and actually what I'm going to be doing right this second is we're swapping these headlights out. Came with these headlights, but when I cleaned the car out, the previous owner had bought a set of these, and they were just sitting brand new in the box in the car. So we're gonna throw these on since we're doing all the wiring, and I had to grab a wire pigtail. I could have reused the old one, but I really just figured if we're doing all of the work we're doing, we might as well get a new pigtail for the plug. So we're gonna be wiring both these in. I actually already have the driver one wired in, so we're gonna replace the passenger one, get it wired in, and then pretty soon we'll be able to put all of the wires from the rear and the front into the PDM, the power distribution module that hooks up to our switch panel, and we'll be able to actually light some things up on this thing. Then we can start moving on to fuel, exhaust, and getting this thing cosmetically up to par. I'm getting excited though.
Start it up.
We got the headlights wired up, and it's all rudimentary. It's not run to the fuse block yet, but I'm gonna test things out because I really want to see what it looks like. We should have turn signals, horn, headlights, running lights. So we'll go down that list and see what all we have. So now running lights. that the halos?
They're not on.
No? Oh, hang on.
Oh, there you go.
Halos?
Yep.
Cool.
Turn signal on the left. Turn signal on the right.
Yeah, this is headlights, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, everything bright.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, super bright. Sweet! I like lights and a horn and a things. It does things. It's more than it's ever done. We gotta wire it into the AUXBEAM and then we'll be good to go. Last night we got the lights tested, but when they were tested, they were not being run through a switch panel. I was just running the bare wires to some positives and making sure all the lights worked. But this morning we went ahead, we cranked away, and we got all of the wires cut to length, routed to the fuse block, relay block, and we've got the switch panel lit up and operational. So, a rundown of what we've got going is we've got right turn signal, left turn signal, horn, running lights, and headlights. The reason I did it in this kind of weird configuration is because these two are good to 5 amps, these two are good to 10 amps, these two are good to 20 amps, and these two are good to 30 amps. I know the turn signals aren't going to take much power, neither is the horn or the running light, and I wanted some higher power options available for in the future if I ever want to change anything. Headlights honestly shouldn't even be on a 30 amp, but the thing is, I kind of wanted them in a convenient spot. So let's go and see what these look like. So I'm going to turn the running lights on, and the running lights rear has all the markers, tails, and of course tag lights. And then in the front, I still need to get these markers wired up. I just need a little bit of wire and the proper plug, but we've got the halos wired up and they look amazing. After that, let's go ahead, see what the headlights look like. So I do not have high beams, low beams wired in right now. I just have low beams, but it looks awesome. Super bright. I'm not really worried about it. You can see the cutoff line in the middle of the day, and that's pretty impressive to me. Now that we've got everything else figured out, let's see about turn signals and what they look like. So this is the left turn signal. It is on a little bit of a weird pattern. It blinks 5 times and then has a pause, but shouldn't be a big deal. It's pretty obvious when these things are on, and we've got front and rear, and of course we've got left and right. All right, now that we got the factory lights all working, we got all the factory headlights, taillights, and everything wired up, we're gonna move on to some more exciting things. For starter, we're gonna replace all of the incandescent bulbs in the back of this thing with some LEDs, again sent over by AUXBEAM. And they also sent over something that I'm actually really excited about, I've never had on a car, and I'm really pumped to install. So here we have got AUXBEAM's newest set of rock lights, AKA Underglow. So these little modules are gonna get mounted to the bottom side of the car, and they are controllable in every single color, so I can have whatever color underglow I want. I can go ahead, I can make this thing light up the road, and it's one of those things, underglow is divisive. You either hate it or you love it, and I've always secretly kind of loved it. So I'm really hoping it looks as good as I'm picturing in my head, but we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna pull this apart, we're gonna see where we can mount this underglow, how we can make it look good, and hopefully, by the end of the day, we'll have the underglow mounted, wired into the switch panel, and we can start on something like the exhaust while I wait for the fuel system to come in the mail. I've been wiring all day. We got all of the underglow mounted, all of the wires run to each other, and the module installed. So I'm actually really excited. We're gonna turn the lights off and see how everything looks. Let's see. Oh ho ho! Look at that. We've got underglow. Ah, the Corolla's coming together. Let's see. We also have our running lights, our turn signals, some crazy underglow. brake lights, headlights. We're done. We've got everything wired up on this thing. That's exciting, and everything is run through the AUXBEAM switch panel, so it's all good to go there. I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna get these lights turned on because you can't see me very well, but look how cool the car is. I'm excited. I can't wait to park this thing at a car show that's at night and just have Underglow going the whole time. And now that we've got the wiring pretty well wrapped up, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna move on to the exhaust. I'm waiting on a few things for the fuel system, and the exhaust is already here, so we should have everything to knock it out. Previously, I just threw this short little downpipe and catalytic converter in, and I just did that really to get the noise down. The noise was going straight at the ground, bouncing everywhere, and making an absolute ear-splitting ruckus. That helped quiet it down a bunch, but what's going to help even more is getting this exhaust out the back of the car. I'm still not completely sure if I'm going to dump pre-axle and dump it out before the back tire, or if I'm going to try and go all the way over the axle. I'm going to see how I feel once I get to the axle, how everything's looking, but either way, I'm just super stoked to be getting an exhaust on this thing. All right, and with that, we have a pretty simple exhaust fabbed up, and it's just going straight out and dumping right before the tire. I need to give it a good little cut here, but for now, I'm probably just gonna leave it long until I decide if I want a fancy cut, if I want an exhaust tip or anything crazy like that. But I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna throw this in, and we finally got some of the fuel fittings in, so I'm gonna see if I have everything to do the fuel system, and I should at least have most everything to get a lot of the fuel system done. Yesterday we went ahead and we wrapped up the exhaust, and it looks pretty good. From outside of the car, all you can see is that little kick out where it sticks out before the back tire. I just left it like this. I'm probably gonna have a cut on it or cut it in back a little bit, but for now, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I figured I'd leave it long because I can always cut it later. If you jump underneath, it's run pretty close to the edge of the car, and the reason for that is there's a pretty big hump where the feet for the backseat passengers go. And I just wanted the exhaust to be as tucked up and out of the way as possible. And after we got that wrapped up, we went ahead, we moved on to our fuel system. So I went ahead and we already had the feed welded on. It's a -10, and we got a -8 return and 2 -8s welded to the fuel rail. This was a little bit of a pain. Welding to cast aluminum is always a little bit of a pain, but it came out pretty good, and I think it'll seal all right. I already have done this once to a different fuel rail for an RZ engine. I went with -8 feed and return on the fuel rail. Well, the major reason I did that was because I was gonna do a -10. I started doing some research, and -8 fuel lines, AN lines, are good to like well over 1,000 horsepower. And I don't think I'll ever be pushing 1,000+ horsepower with this fuel rail. So I'm not super worried. I've got a -10 feed out of the tank, so if I ever do upgrade engines or fuel rails or anything like that, I'll have plenty of fuel coming out of the tank and I won't have to modify it. I'm gonna go ahead and do -10 through the first fuel filter to the fuel pump. At the fuel pump, I'm gonna reduce it to a -8 and run those lines all the way up to the rail through another filter, of course, because we're gonna have a pre-pump filter, a post-pump filter, lines all the way up to the fuel rail, return to a fuel pressure regulator that's gonna then send it back to the tank. Now, I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna grab that tank and we're gonna throw it in and we're gonna start running our lines, placing our filters and our pump and everything. I am waiting for a couple more fittings in the fuel pressure regulator that are supposed to be in the mail today, but I don't know for sure if they're gonna show up. Hopefully they do. If they do, I should be able to wrap the entire fuel system up today, and this thing should fire up. It already fired up. The only thing it's missing right now is the fuel system. I pulled the fuel pump off of this thing to get a different car running, and when I did that, I just decided that I wasn't gonna do a stupid, crappy fuel system in this thing, and I was just gonna go do it right the first time, get everything redone. That way fuel isn't ever an issue on this build. All right, well, after an entire day of getting a fuel system together, an absolute atrocious mess across the shop, and fixing 3 leaks before I even did anything more than pour the quarter gallon of gas that was in my can before I went and got gas, I think we finally have our fuel system together. So I've got a -10 feed welded to the bottom of the tank that comes out, goes into a pre-pump filter. That pre-pump filter comes and goes to the pump, pump then goes to a post-pump filter, up to the fuel rail where I modified the fuel rail. After the fuel rail, it comes back down to a return, a regulator, back all the way up to the -8 return right there. So hopefully everything works out. We're about to test it for the first time. For the first test of our fuel system, since we did all new lines from the back to the front, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to put all of the fuel straight into this container so that hopefully no gross stuff gets caught up in our fuel injectors or anything important. We have filters back there, but there's still line in between the last filter and the fuel rail, so I'm just trying to be safe. All right, in order to get this thing to prime, I'm just gonna turn the key and let the fuel system prime. Woo! Well, currently the fuel pressure in this thing is turned way up. Let's see if you can see in there. The fuel pressure regulator isn't in a great spot, but the fuel pressure is turned up to about 80 PSI, 75 or 80, which is double what we're gonna be running, but that's what they suggest to test all these lines, and it's looking good. Neither of my welds on the fuel rail are leaking, none of the fuel injectors are leaking, none of the lines on the fuel rail or to the fuel pressure regulator are leaking. Past the regulator should be a no pressure zone, but if we jump down here next to this kind of noisy pump, we can see there's no leaks post pump on any of these lines. Our leaks before were at the pre-filter, and we were having just an absolute menace of a time trying to get that thing to stop leaking. I had about a quarter gallon of gas in my gas can, and I poured that into the tank, and it just poured straight onto the ground. I thought the AN line wasn't tight. It turns out that both these -10 AN fittings that are 45s are garbage, like absolute garbage. They just wanted to pour fuel everywhere, so I went ahead, I replaced them with a straight fitting. It's not ideal line placement, but the line doesn't leak anymore. So I guess I'm probably gonna look at some more quality fittings. These were all cheaper fittings and lines, not the cheapest, but cheaper. And it's looking like we're gonna need to buy some quality line fittings, especially for right there. It just absolutely did not want to seal. That means we can go ahead. I'm gonna finish putting this intake together, put this coil pack back on, get the throttle body and stuff on there. And we should be able to start this thing up and see if it runs, see how well it runs, and also see what our exhaust sounds like. I'm really excited about that. Definitely not put together, but it's put together enough that we should be able to fire it up. I need to do an intake soon because this cluster of garbage that's going on, I need a housing, I need a lot. We're gonna figure this out, but for now, this thing should fire up, and it should fire up with the key. Wait, why is me ol' fueled pump not fueling? It should be fuel pumping when the engine cranks. Did I blow a fuse? We in fact had a fuse that was not fusing, so hopefully this time it starts. The fuel pump's actually cycling this time. Yeah, that loud fuel pump. I'd say it's a little loud. Here. Wow, it's a lot louder over here. with a fuel system that doesn't suck. And also, I blasted you a little hard in the camera there. All right, we've got the Corolla together. We threw a rudimentary intake together on it. We're about to take it for a first cruise. We're not going far, but we're gonna actually drive this thing. This thing is kind of ear-splittingly loud. Look at this car. It looks so good in the sunlight. Oh, I'm pumped. This thing looks awesome. It drove decent. It doesn't drive great. I still need to go over a bunch of things. Not even sure that this mass airflow sensor is good. I know it's decent, but I'm not sure how great it is because I know I had one bad mass airflow sensor. I forget which one it is. But man, it feels good to see this thing out and about. Well, you know me and my cars, so time to see if this thing will do a nice and proper burnout. It doesn't do burnouts very well. All right, well, it doesn't do a very good burnout, but it moves. This thing is rowdy. Oh my God, this thing is gonna get me in trouble with this exhaust. This car is a blast. These rear tires have zero traction. NA. This thing is going to be absolutely ludicrous. I'm so pumped. So, I think that's it for now. I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you subscribing, and I can't wait to see what this thing does on the dyno and what it does when I can actually get it out on the streets.